6:14 a.m. October 23, 2025, Savannah, Georgia. A warehouse clerk named Priya Nair set down her scanner and picked up a shipping label. Estimated face value of the goods it covered. 340 million. That yet, nobody did. The label was attached to a crate of industrial pressure regulators, manifested as agricultural irrigation components, routed through a logistics hub at the port of Savannah's Garden City terminal. The crate weighed 847 pounds. It was scheduled for pickup in 4 hours. Nair had been working the night shift at Meridian Freight Solutions for 11 months. Her job was routine. Scan, log, flag anomalies, move on. Most nights she flagged nothing. Damaged packaging. Incorrect weight notations, the occasional misdirected pallet, small things. Paper cuts in a system built on millions of paper cuts per day. This label was different, not because of what it said. The customs data was clean. The shipper's information, a company called Radiant Global Agricultural Supply, incorporated in Delaware with a listed address in Atlanta, checked out against the manifest. The consignee, a trading entity in Oman, was unremarkable. Hundreds of similar consignments moved through the Garden City terminal every week. What Priya Nair noticed was the paper. The label had been reprinted. The original label, which had been peeled off, had left a faint ghost of adhesive residue around the edges, a slightly different texture, a fractional variation in how the light caught the surface. The replacement label had been printed on a different adhesive stock, standard commercial label paper, not the coated logistics-grade stock that Meridian used for its primary consignment labels. Someone had printed a new label on an office printer and applied it over the original. Nair logged a one-line anomaly note in Meridian's internal system at 6:19 a.m. Label stock inconsistency. Crate ID, MFS 2025-10287, flagged for secondary review. She moved on to the next pallet. She would not think about that crate again for almost 3 weeks. The crate was held for secondary review, which in the normal flow of Meridian's operations meant it sat in a secondary staging area while a supervisor cleared its paperwork, typically within 24 to 48 hours. The supervisor, a man named Dale Hutchins, reviewed the manifest, saw no customs irregularities, and released the crate for pickup on October 25, 2025. It left the terminal on a flatbed truck at 9:47. Destination: a freight consolidation warehouse in Brunswick, Georgia, 45 miles south of Savannah. The one-line anomaly note remained in Meridian's system, unread by anyone above Hutchins. Unforwarded to CBP or BIS or any authority, just a line in a database. One line among hundreds of thousands logged that month. The line did not disappear, that was the thing. In early November 2025, a compliance analyst at the Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry Security ran a routine automated sweep of anomaly logs that Meridian submitted as part of its trusted trader status obligations. The sweep wasn't looking for anything in particular. It was a pattern detection pass, hundreds of variables cross-referenced against known evasion indicators. The analyst's name was James Calloway. He was based in Washington, D.C., and had been running these sweeps for 3 years. He processed the output flagged by the algorithm, which on most weeks produced nothing actionable. On November 9, 2025, the algorithm flagged Priya Nair's one-line note, not because of the note itself, because of what the note connected to. The crate ID, MFS 25102847, appeared in a separate BIS watchlist cross-reference, not as a known violator. As an entity adjacency hit. The consignee in Oman, a company called Al Farouk Trading LLC, had appeared in a 2022 BS preliminary inquiry as a potential third-party broker for sanctioned Iranian end users. The inquiry had been closed without formal action due to insufficient evidence. Calloway pulled the full manifest. He looked at the contents, industrial pressure regulators. He checked the export control classification number. The regulators were dual-use components, items with both civilian and military applications, subject to enhanced export controls under the Export Administration Regulations. They required a specific export license for shipment to certain destinations. The export license on the manifest was valid on its. Calloway spent 4 hours on November 9 running validation checks against the Commerce Export License database. The license number on the manifest did not match any license issued for this specific exporter, this specific consignee, and this specific commodity. The number was real. It had been issued in 2023. But it had been issued to a different company for a different product for a shipment to a different country. Someone had taken a legitimate license number and attached it to a transaction it didn't cover. Calloway forwarded his analysis to the Export Enforcement Division. The following morning, he received a call from Special Agent Diane Morales at BIS's Office of Export Enforcement in Atlanta. She asked him one question: how many other shipments had gone through this same freight network in the past 12 months? Calloway ran the query. The answer came back in 47 minutes, 19 shipments, 11 different exporters, 3 separate freight forwarders, all routed through the same Georgia logistics corridor, Savannah, Brunswick, or Jacksonville, within the past 14 months. Combined declared value on the manifest, $62 million. Most of the manifest listed dual-use industrial component. Pressure regulators, flow control valves, industrial sensors, pump assemblies, heat exchangers, all categories on the Commerce Department's enhanced controls list. All of them with some variation of the same pattern. Export licenses that were real but didn't match the transaction they were covering. Morales hung up and contacted the Department of Justice's National Security Division. Within 48 hours, a joint investigation had been opened. Participating agencies: his Office of Export Enforcement, FBI Counterintelligence Division, OFAC, and Customs and Border Protection. Task Force designation, Operation Cardboard. The investigation would eventually span 6 states and 3 continents. It identified a sanctions evasion network that had been running continuously since at least early 2024, moving American-manufactured dual-use industrial components through a layered shell freight infrastructure, ultimately delivering goods to end users in Iran at a time when U.S. sanctions on Iranian industrial imports were among the tightest in decades. The Hormuz crisis had changed everything. By late October 2025, tensions in the Strait of Hormuz had reached a level not seen since 2019. Iranian naval forces had conducted 3 separate harassment operations against U.S. and allied commercial shipping in September and October. The Biden-era partial sanctions relief framework had collapsed in August when Iran resumed enrichment activity at Fordow. In response, the Treasury Department had issued a new tranche of sanctions targeting Iranian industrial procurement networks, specifically networks acquiring dual-use components with potential applications in military systems and naval propulsion infrastructure. The components moving through Operation Cardboard's network fit precisely within Treasury's new targeting framework. The investigation team had 19 shipments to trace. They started with the oldest and worked forward. The first confirmed shipment had left the port of Charleston in January 2024. Industrial pump assemblies. Listed exporter, a company called Pacific Rim Technical Exports, incorporated in Nevada with a registered agent address in Las Vegas. The consignee, a trading entity in Dubai. The declared end use on the export license application, civilian water treatment infrastructure in Oman. Pacific Rim Technical Exports had no office. It had never filed a federal tax return. Its registered agent was a commercial mail forwarding service that handled incorporation paperwork for thousands of shell companies. The pump assemblies arrived in Dubai in March 2024. From there, the trail ended. Morales' team requested shipping records from the freight forwarder that had handled the Dubai leg of the consignment, a company called Interlink Maritime Logistics headquartered in Fujairah, UAE. The records showed the pump assemblies had been received at a bonded warehouse in Jebel Ali and re-exported to Oman 6 days later. The Omani consignee, a company called Gulf Technical Solutions, had received the shipment and signed the delivery documentation. Gulf Technical Solutions dissolved its registration in May 2024, 2 months after receiving the shipment. The physical location of the company's listed warehouse in Muscat, Oman had been inspected by local authorities in June 2024 following an unrelated customs inquiry. The warehouse was empty. It had been leased for 4 months and vacated. The pump assemblies were gone. OFAC's intelligence unit provided the next piece. Their analysis of financial flows through known Iranian procurement front companies had flagged a series of payments in late 2023 and early 2024 originating from accounts connected to an Iranian state-linked industrial procurement entity. The payments had moved through at least 4 intermediate accounts in 3 countries before reaching a final recipient, a holding company registered in the British Virgin Islands called Harborgate Trade Partners. Harborgate Trade Partners was the parent entity of 3 of the U.S.-based shell exporters identified in Operation Cardboard's shipment analysis, including Pacific Rim Technical Exports. The money was Iranian, the goods were American. The infrastructure in between was designed to make both facts disappear. The task force had a financial thread and a logistics thread. They needed a person. The freight forwarding element was the key. 3 different U.S.-based freight forwarders had handled the 19 shipments. 2 were small operations with no apparent connection to the underlying scheme. They had been used once or twice each, likely for diversifications. There was no evidence their operators knew the true nature of the cargo or the end users. The third forwarder was different. Coastal Express Forwarding, Inc., based in Brunswick, Georgia, founded in 2019. Owner and president, a man named Raymond Stokes, 54 years old, former logistics manager at a mid-sized port services company in Savannah. Coastal Express had handled 11 of the 19 shipments. Its role was not passive. In 7 of those shipments, Coastal Express had been the party that prepared the customs documentation, including the export license citations. In all 7 cases, the license numbers cited were the fraudulent ones, real numbers, wrong transactions. Raymond Stokes had signed the export declarations himself. The task force opened a full surveillance operation on Coastal Express in late November 2025. Physical surveillance on the Brunswick facility and on Stokes' personal residence. Pen register orders on his business and personal phone lines, subpoenas to his financial institutions. Analysis of his email metadata through a court-authorized search. What they found in the first 2 weeks confirmed their theory and expanded the scale of what they were looking at. Stokes had been communicating with a logistics coordinator based in Dubai, a man identified in the investigation's working documents as Source Echo, through a combination of encrypted messaging applications and a commercial email service based in Europe. The content of those communications was not immediately available to the task force, but the pattern of contact was clear. Regular exchanges, typically occurring within 48 hours before or after a shipment departed. His financial records showed deposits inconsistent with the legitimate revenue of a small freight forwarding company. Between January 2024 and October 2025, Coastal Express had processed approximately $4.1 million in declared freight forwarding fees, a plausible number for a business of its size. But Stokes' personal accounts showed an additional $2.3 million in deposits during the same period, routed through a series of transfers from 2 shell companies registered in Cyprus and Liechtenstein. The $2.3 million was his fee for 11 shipments. Per shipment, roughly $210,000 for preparing false documentation, citing fraudulent export licenses, and ensuring the cargo cleared without secondary examination. The investigation hit its first significant obstacle in December 2025. The encrypted messaging platform Stokes used for his communications with Dubai had servers in a jurisdiction that had no mutual legal assistance treaty with the United States. Obtaining the content of those messages required a diplomatic process that would take months, and that process, if it became visible to the network, risked tipping off Stokes before the task force was ready to move. The decision was made to proceed without the message content. The financial evidence and the fraudulent documentation were sufficient for a charging instrument. The message content would strengthen the case but wasn't essential to it. What the task force needed was a window into the network's current operational tempo, whether Stokes was still active, whether additional shipments were in preparation, and whether there were other US-based nodes beyond the three freight forwarders already identified. That window came from an unexpected direction, PRIA. In mid-December 2025, BIS investigators made contact with Meridian Freight Solutions Compliance Department in connection with the broader investigation. During a document review, an investigator pulled up the anomaly log from October 23 and saw Nair's one-line note. They requested an interview. Nair met with Special Agent Morales and a BIS investigator named Craig Pachter at a conference room in Meridian's administrative office on December 17, 2025. The interview lasted 2.5 hours. Nair walked them through exactly what she had noticed: the label stock inconsistency, the adhesive residue pattern, the specific visual difference between the replacement label and Meridian's standard stock. She demonstrated on a sample label how to identify the difference under fluorescent light. She had noticed it because she had been doing her job, not because she suspected anything. Not because she had been trained to look for sanctions evasion, because a shipping label looked wrong. Because she had spent 11 months looking at thousands of shipping labels and knew what they were supposed to look like. Pachter asked her if she had noticed anything similar in other shipments. Nair said she wasn't sure. She might have seen something similar once before, maybe 3 or 4 months earlier, but hadn't flagged it because she wasn't certain. Pachter asked if she could look at records for the prior months and see if any similar anomaly turned up in her memory. Nair spent 2 evenings in late December reviewing the physical crate logs for her shift going back to June 2025. She found 2 additional crates that she recalled having a similar label inconsistency. Neither had been flagged. She hadn't been certain enough at the time. Both crates matched shipment records in the cardboard database. The task force now had a human source, not a confidential informant, not a planted operative, just a night shift logistics clerk who looked at labels more carefully than most people look at anything. Morales requested authorization to expand the investigation scope to include real-time monitoring of additional shipments moving through the Georgia logistics corridor. The authorization was granted in late December. CBP deployed additional inspection resources at the Garden City Terminal and Brunswick's port facilities, operating under cover of routine enhanced inspection protocols. Between January 5 and January 28, 2026, 3 additional shipments were intercepted at secondary examination. All 3 had the same pattern: dual-use industrial components, manifested under misleading commodity descriptions, with fraudulent export license citations. One of the 3 shipments was being managed by Coastal Express Forwarding. Raymond Stokes had signed the export declaration 4 days before the crate arrived at the terminal. The task force now had a live shipment tied directly to Stokes with a clear chain of custody. The fraudulent license citation was documented at the moment of export before any interception created evidence of evasion. On January 31, 2026, the task force briefed the Department of Justice's National Security Division on the full scope of the investigation. Present at that briefing, prosecutors from the DOJ's Export Controls and Sanctions Unit, FBI Counterintelligence, BIS OE, OFAC, and CBP. The briefing lasted 4 hours. The subject matter was larger than anyone in the room had expected when Callaway first forwarded his November analysis. The 19 original shipments had grown to 26 confirmed. The combined declared value on the fraudulent manifests, $1 trillion. The estimated true market value of the dual-use components, based on end-user pricing in sanctioned markets, 340. The discrepancy was deliberate. Undervaluation on the manifest served 2 purposes. It reduced the apparent scale of each transaction, keeping individual shipments below thresholds that triggered automatic enhanced review, and it reduced the customs duties payable on the declared value. $700 million. That was OFAC's intelligence unit's estimate for the total procurement capacity of the Iranian industrial entities believed to be the ultimate end users of the components identified in the network. The $340 million pipeline was part of a larger acquisition effort targeting specific categories of dual-use equipment with applications in maritime propulsion and pressure management systems. The Hormuz context was no longer peripheral. The components moving through Operation Cardboard's network, pressure regulators, pump assemblies, flow control valves, industrial sensors, were the kinds of components needed to maintain and upgrade the engineering systems of large marine vessels, including naval vessels. OFAC's intelligence unit assessed with moderate confidence that at least a portion of the components acquired through this network had reached Iranian naval maintenance facilities. The assessment was classified. It was shared with the National Security Council. What changed after that briefing was the pace. The investigation had been moving methodically. Now it moved with urgency. The task force needed to identify every US-based node in the network before moving to arrests. If Stokes was arrested before the other participants were identified, the network would collapse and the remaining actors would disappear. The Dubai-based coordinator Source Echo was beyond U.S. jurisdiction and would likely become unreachable the moment U.S. law enforcement made a visible move. FBI Counterintelligence ran a focused analysis on the financial flows through Harborgate Trade Partners and its subsidiary shell companies. The analysis identified two additional U.S.-based entities beyond Coastal Express that appeared to be active participants in the network. The first was a freight brokerage in Houston, Texas called Transgulf Cargo Services. Its owner, a man named Marcus Webb, 51, had handled 4 of the 26 confirmed shipments. The financial analysis showed Webb had received approximately $800,000 in unexplained deposits over the 18-month period. The second was a licensed customs broker operating out of Jacksonville, Florida, a woman named Sandra Petty, 47, who had prepared the customs documentation for 3 shipments, including 2 of the most recent ones. Petty held a valid customs broker license issued by CBP and had a 14-year clean compliance record. Her involvement was the most troubling to the task force. A licensed, experienced customs professional who knew exactly what the regulations required and had chosen to circumvent them. The obstacle to moving quickly was the Dubai node. Source Echo had been identified through a combination of financial analysis and commercial intelligence as a man named Khalid al-Rashidi, a Jordanian national with UAE residency who operated a legitimate freight consultancy in Fujairah as cover. Al-Rashidi was not subject to U.S. jurisdiction. He was not on any OFAC list. He could not be arrested. But if the U.S. end of the network was dismantled without his cooperation or his incapacitation as an operational node, he would simply rebuild the procurement chain with new U.S.-based intermediaries within months. The task force's solution was a coordinated notification to the UAE Financial Intelligence Unit, submitted through Treasury channels on February 14, 2026. The notification identified al-Rashidi's financial activities and requested that UAE authorities initiate their own inquiry. The UAE's response came back within 6 days. Their Financial Intelligence Unit had opened an investigation and had requested a temporary asset freeze on accounts connected to al-Rashidi's consultancy pending review. Al-Rashidi was not arrested. He was not publicly identified, but his financial access was suspended. He could not move money. He could not pay for new shipments. For the operational timeline of the cardboard investigation, that was sufficient. The arrest operation was set for March 4, 2026. Simultaneous. 3 cities designed to ensure that none of the 3 primary U.S.-based targets, Stokes, Webb, Petty, could warn the others before they were in custody. The logistics were managed by FBI field offices in Atlanta, coordinating the Stokes arrest in Brunswick, Houston, Webb, and Jacksonville. CBP provided liaison and supplementary personnel. BIS investigators were embedded with each arrest team to provide technical expertise for the document seizures. The night before the operation at 11:48 p.m. on March 3, 2026, Morales received a call from the Jacksonville FBI office. Sandra Petty had not been at her office or her residence for the previous 6 hours. Her car was in her driveway. Her phone was active, but she was not responding to surveillance. Her last confirmed location was a grocery store at 4:22 p.m. The Jacksonville team had 2 options: delay the operation or proceed without confirmed location on Petty. Delaying risked the Brunswick and Houston arrests. Any of 3 targets communicating with the others before being taken into custody could trigger flight or evidence destruction. Morales authorized the operation to proceed. Jacksonville would locate Petty in the window. At 5:47 a.m. on March 4, 2026, Brunswick, Georgia, 14 federal agents in 4 vehicles moved through the pre-dawn streets of Brunswick's historic district towards a residential address on Dartmouth Street. Raymond Stokes lived in a 2-story colonial revival house 3 blocks from the waterfront. The lights were off. His truck was in the driveway. The agents staged at the perimeter at 5:51 a.m. 2 at the rear, 2 at the side entrance. The primary team of 6 at the front door. At 5:54 a.m., the team knocked and announced. Raymond Stokes answered the door in a bathrobe holding a coffee mug. He was placed under arrest at 5:55 a.m. on charges of conspiracy to violate the Export Administration regulations, making false statements to federal agents, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. He said nothing. His attorney was called at 6:08 a.m. In Houston, Marcus Webb was arrested at his office at 6:02 a.m. local time, 1 hour behind Eastern. Webb had arrived at Transgulf's offices at 5:45 a.m., an hour before his normal arrival time. The surveillance team noted the anomaly and held position. Webb entered the building, made 1 phone call from his desk. The recipient was a number associated with a commercial freight database service, not a co-conspirator, and then the arrest team moved. Webb was in custody at 6:04 a.m. In Jacksonville, Sandra Petty was 5:59 a.m. She had spent the night at her sister's house 4 miles from her own residence. She had not fled. She had not communicated with any co-conspirators. She had apparently simply had a family dinner that ran late. She was arrested at her sister's front door at 6:03 a.m. Her sister watched from behind a screen door. The 3 arrests were completed within 9 minutes of each other. Simultaneous search warrants executed at all 3 locations, plus the Coastal Express forwarding facility in Brunswick and the Transgulf offices in Houston. The document seizures were extensive. At Coastal Express, 8 bankers' boxes of shipping records, 3 laptop computers, 2 external hard drives, and in a filing cabinet in Stokes' private office, a handwritten ledger containing notations that investigators would later identify as a record of 22 transactions with corresponding dollar amounts, dates, and abbreviated consignee references. The ledger had not been shredded. It had not been encrypted. It was sitting in a filing cabinet with a functional lock, which the search team opened with a warrant and a standard drill in 45 seconds. At Transgulf in Houston, electronic records showing financial transfers of $847,000 in unexplained payments, and a second set of email correspondence, not encrypted, stored in a commercial web email service, showing Webb's direct communication with al-Rashidi's Fujairah operation over a 14-month period. The electronic evidence from Webb's email account was, in the assessment of the DOJ prosecutors, the clearest single piece of evidence in the case. Webb and al-Rashidi had communicated with the directness of two businessmen completing routine transactions. No codes. No euphemisms. In one exchange from September 2025, al-Rashidi had specified the desired commodity, the required technical specifications, the preferred U.S. supplier, and the target delivery schedule. Webb had replied with a quote for his handling fee. The email was time-stamped. It had Webb's name on it. It referenced the specific shipment that had been intercepted by CBP in January 2026. At Petty's office in Jacksonville, agents recovered documentation sufficient to establish her role in the 3 shipments she had handled, including handwritten notes on the specific export license number she had cited, with the original license numbers crossed out and the fraudulent substitutes written above them. The search operations concluded by early afternoon on March 4. The indictments were unsealed that same day at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. The charges against Raymond Stokes: conspiracy to violate the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which covers sanctions violations; conspiracy to violate the Export Administration Regulations, making and using false export declarations; wire fraud affecting financial institutions; and money laundering in connection with the $2.3 million in personal payments. The charges against Marcus Webb, substantially identical to Stokes, with the wire fraud and money laundering counts reflecting the $847,000 he had received. The charges against Sandra Petty: conspiracy to violate the year, false statements in export declarations, and aiding and abetting the others' violations. The charges against Petty were more narrowly drawn than those against Stokes and Webb. The evidence indicated she had been a knowing participant but not an initiator or primary architect of the scheme. The Department of Justice press release issued at 4:15 p.m. on March 4 described the operation in summary. It did not use the word Iran. It referred to sanctioned jurisdictions and prohibited end users. The classification wall around the OFAC intelligence assessment meant the public statement could not describe the ultimate destination of the components or their assessed applications. Readers of the press release who followed export enforcement cases understood what the language meant. At OFAC, an emergency designation order was filed that same afternoon, adding Harborgate Trade Partners and its 3 identified U.S. subsidiary shell companies to the specially designated nationals list. The designation froze all assets subject to U.S. jurisdiction and prohibited any U.S. person from engaging in transactions with the designated entities. The combined value of assets frozen under the designation, $18.4 million, the amount that remained in accessible accounts connected to the network at the time of the order. $340 million had moved, $18 million was recovered, the rest was gone. What the task force had recovered were the records, the indictments, the 3 defendants, the closed end of the pipeline. The open end, the ultimate Iranian recipients, the specific end users within Iran's industrial or defense infrastructure who had received and used the components, remained beyond reach. Not just legally beyond reach, factually opaque. The components had moved through too many intermediary hands, through too many jurisdictions with incomplete commercial record keeping, to allow the task force to trace each item to a final location. What do you think? The system caught this network, but only because one person filed a one-line note that happened to stay in a database long enough to be queried. How many similar networks are running right now, moving through freight hubs where nobody noticed the paper? The investigation's rough edges were documented in the grand jury materials but did not appear in the press release. Khalid al-Rashidi remained in the UAE. The asset freeze on his accounts was temporary, a UAE administrative measure, not a criminal finding. His investigation by UAE authorities was ongoing as of the date of the U.S. indictment. He had not been charged with any offense in any jurisdiction. The 11 exporters, whose names had appeared on the fraudulent manifests, the shell companies incorporated in Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming, had all been dissolved before the arrest operation. Their registered agents had been notified. Their bank accounts showed 0 balances. In several cases, investigators were unable to identify the natural persons who had controlled the entities. The corporate structures had been designed for precisely this outcome: dissolution without attribution. Of the $340 million in estimated pipeline value, the task force could account for components recovered in the intercepted shipments, 9 shipments totaling approximately $47 million in declared value, and the $18.4 million in frozen financial assets. The remainder, components already delivered and payments already dispersed, was unrecovered. The handwritten ledger from Stokes' office noted 22 transactions. The task force had confirmed 26 shipments in the network. The 4 discrepancy shipments, 4 shipments Stokes apparently hadn't noted in his ledger, remained unexplained. Whether those were shipments handled entirely outside his knowledge, or whether the ledger was incomplete, investigators could not determine. Raymond Stokes appeared in federal court in the Southern District of Georgia on March 11, 2026. He did not enter a plea. His attorney indicated he was evaluating his options. Marcus Webb entered a not guilty plea in the Southern District of Texas on March 12. His attorney issued a statement describing the charges as an overreach and indicating that Webb had not known the ultimate destination of the shipments he handled. The statement was contradicted by the email evidence, but that was a matter for trial, not a press statement. Sandra Petty entered a not guilty plea in the Middle District of Florida on March 14. Her attorney indicated she was cooperating with investigators on aspects of the investigation not related to the 3 shipments named in her indictment. The significance of that phrasing was not lost on the prosecutors. Petty knew something beyond the 3 shipments. Whether that something would narrow the gaps in the investigation, the unidentified controllers, the 4 unaccounted ledger entries, the full scope of what had been delivered and where, depended on what she chose to say and what she received in exchange for saying it. As of the date of the indictments, no plea agreement with Petty had been announced. Priya Nair continued working the night shift at Meridian Freight Solutions. She had been interviewed twice more by investigators after the initial December meeting. She had provided additional observations about label anomalies she had seen in prior months. She had not been named publicly in connection with the investigation. The investigative referral chain, from her anomaly note to Callaway's BizQuery to Morales' case to the DOJ indictments, was documented in the investigative record but not in any public filing. What struck the investigators who worked this case, the element that came up repeatedly in their internal discussions, was not the sophistication of the network. Sanctions evasion networks moving dual-use components through shell freight infrastructure were not new. The mechanisms were known. The use of fraudulent export license citations, the layered shell companies, the UA transit hub, the dissolved consignees, these were documented patterns, variations on methods that had appeared in prior enforcement actions going back decades. What was unusual was the fragility of the network's concealment at the U.S. end. The fraudulent license citations were not sophisticated forgeries. They were real license numbers applied to the wrong transactions, a shortcut that any trained compliance analyst could detect with a database query. The shell exporters used commercial registered agent services with no effort to create substantive business presences. The financial flows to Stokes and Webb used accounts in the United States, subject to U.S. banking regulations and subpoena, rather than offshore structures that would have required additional legal steps to access. The network had survived for 14 months not because it was well hidden. It had survived because the volume of legitimate freight moving through American port facilities is large enough that even a detectable pattern requires a specific trigger to be noticed. The trigger was a night shift clerk who knew what shipping labels were supposed to look like. The network is dismantled. The demand that created it still exists. The components that reach their destination are already in use somewhere. The audit trail ends at a bonded warehouse in Jebel Ali in the spring of 2024. If this investigation found you, subscribe. The next case starts where this one ends.